That sounds
What's going
awful.
on here? There we go. Start video.
Oh, there you
Ah,
are.
there I am. Yeah, I
Hi.
got to color my hair today too. Well, I'm glad we finally connected. I know this has been a bit of a project for us,
Yeah,
but
no, I'm so delighted. It's so good to meet
yeah,
you. How are
nice meeting you
you?
too. Finally, um, crazed kind of. I've had a really busy winter. We had a trip to Italy. We had the holidays, so I've been doing physical therapy, da, 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 and trying to work and write at the same time. So I'm busy and a bit crazed, but I'm here, which I
Okay.
guess is part of the theme of your videos.
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, so I want to introduce you. I know you, I know you're a clinical psychologist, is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
And I know you as an author
Right.
and a husband, and you lived in North Carolina, and then now you're in New Jersey,
No,
is that
actually,
right?
when we first got introduced, I was visiting family in North Carolina.
Okay.
I've lived in New Jersey for the last 30 some odd years, and just moved from one part to another, um, kind of in preparation for retirement, which is a few years away, but
Hmm.
um, just needed to downsize. We had an old Victorian that we were tired of taking care of.
Yeah,
Um, their constant work, and
right.
so we thought, let's try to make our lives a little easier. Has it gotten easier? I'm not sure, but
Not according to your book.
no, no.
And can you tell everybody the title of your book?
So the book that's out there is called Four Funerals, No Marriage, and that was about caregiving and
Yeah.
taking care of my uh, parents and my mother-in-law as she was dying, and it really grew out of I'd been a stand-up comedian for a while.
Oh, nice.
Well, as a hobby, I never made any money at
But
it.
you've done that. That's incredible.
Right, right, and I found the scene to be really homophobic and misogynist, and I got really tired of listening to that crap. And so I started, what else can I do to get my humor out there? So the book is a memoir from a humor perspective on saying that, taking care of and then saying goodbye to people that you love.
Hmm.
Um, and now I'm working on a sequel to that, which is more about being a patient myself. Um,
Oh, wow.
10 years ago, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer and
Uh-huh.
had a lot of experience with the healthcare system at that point.
Very.
And I thought that when I started writing the book, that's what it was going to be about. And
Hmm.
then last April, I had a heart attack and
Oh,
got re-exposed to it and
wow.
realized that these conditions sort of challenged my sense of who I am and who I am as a man in the world. And
Hmm.
so I've kind of changed the direction of what I'm writing and, working hard to try to get a manuscript together. So,
Well, good luck. That's intense.
yeah.
What strikes me right away is how both heart attack and prostate cancer are extremely male
Hmm.
inflictions or whatever you want to call them. So that's interesting to me. But we can talk about that. So I know the one thing that you and I have in common is that well, you were or maybe are. I also was a caregiver for my
Right.
dying mother and now my father, and so that's tell me about that. Or
So,
tell me what
yeah.
you want to tell me.
So, basically, I've actually, the way we tend to keep up is through Facebook, and I've been following your adventures with your dad, and I really love the sort of tender relationship you've developed. I don't know if it's always been that way. For me, it was really interesting because in the book, it sort of opens with my mom having this medical crisis, but the journey began with my father-in-law, who was a very difficult man
Mm,
and who we had a very difficult relationship with. And when he first got ill, I really couldn't find the empathy that I needed to help take care of him and things. But
hmm.
I eventually it developed, and then all at once, my mother-in-law had cancer, my mom had a heart attack, and my father had a stroke.
Jesus,
And they were all in the hospital and getting treatment all at the same time. And
that's a
my life
lot.
became nothing but caregiving. And
Wow.
I think the humor that I found was what kept me going. Um, my father, he didn't last very long after the stroke. He was around for about 6 more months, I think, 5 more months.
Mm,
Um, but they actually had been living down the Raleigh area and were
mhm,
never very happy there. And the whole thing started because they decided they wanted to move back to New Jersey to be near my husband and I. And they came up to go apart, house hunting. And I came home from work one day, and there's my mom sitting in the dark as usual because it's too much work to turn on a light bulb. And she's like, "I think your father's having a stroke." And I said, "What do you think?" Right?
what?
And so she describes this behavior where he was couldn't find where he wanted to be in a parking lot, was driving over curbs,
Mm,
and I was like, "And you didn't call the ambulance then?" "No, we had to get home." I was like, "And you drove with him, right?" Because she wasn't driving at the time.
wow.
And then he was upstairs, and I was just sort of like, "Well, there's a time limit on when you can get treatment for a stroke and da da da." And the doctors never really even decided if it was a stroke. He did have pneumonia, and they think part of it was oxygen deprivation.
Mm,
Um, but basically, they never left. My sister-in-law closed up their house in North Carolina, and
mhm,
I got them situated up here nearer to me. Um, but then, that was like in the spring. That Labor Day, my father got sick again, and he passed
mhm.
like a week after that. And then I was left taking care of my mom. And because they had lived away for so long, I wasn't on top of her medical history. I didn't know a lot
Yeah,
about what was going on with her. Um, so I quickly became educated on that,
yeah.
became educated on the family dynamics of caregiving.
I just want
Um,
to hold, just kind of reel back a
yeah.
little and let people know that who aren't caregivers how intense it is. Like
Oh,
it is 24/7. It is anxiety producing. I mean, to find humor, well, you have to find humor in it to survive because
right.
and I only had my mother. I had a contentious relationship with her, but I loved her and taking care of her, it was hard. And I had my dad with me, but
Uh,
you had all these people, you had a raft of people to
so,
take care of.
I mean, thank God I had my husband because
Yeah.
together we worked really well. And he was an only child. And
Mm,
when we were caregiving for his father, he used to say to me, "You are so lucky that you are not an only child and you have brothers. And when the time comes for you, you'll have all this help."
mm-hmm,
And when my parents did get sick, and he saw how uninvolved, especially my older brother, who
mm,
had like been through the whole thing because he lived in North Carolina,
mm-hmm.
he was useless. And he was
Wow.
like, maybe it is better to be an only child because then you don't have expectations that other people are going to help you.
Wow.
And, you know, and I think ultimately they felt like they were giving me the autonomy to make the decisions, but there were times that
Mm,
I needed them to
mm-hmm,
say to me, "What can we do?" Or like, "Just help me make a decision."
mm-hmm.
And they were like, "Well, we don't want to intervene. We don't want to interfere." And I was just like, "I need you to,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because I don't want you questioning the things that I did afterwards," which thankfully they never did.
Well, and plus you get
Um,
decision overload,
right? Oh, absolutely,
exhaustion.
absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, trying to, but there were humor like in everyday little things, and um, you know, the first time I was in the emergency room with my mom, I could just tell how anxious she was, and I was trying to calm her down. And I, I started to make jokes. And one of the biggest jokes that we had was, you know, you have no dignity when you're in the hospital, and especially not in the emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
And this nurse was like, at one point, was, well, looks at me and goes, "Well, you guys may want to leave the room." And I was like, "Okay." And my mom's like, "No, no, no, they can stay, they can stay." And the nurse
Mm-hmm.
looked really confused. So I went, "Ugh, mom was a stripper back in the day and she raised me in the dressing room."
Ah!
Um, you could see my mother's monitor going wild at that, right? And the nurses didn't know. But
Right.
then she goes, "Oh, well, okay," and she just rips like my mom's like gown off. And there I'm like staring at my mom's boobs. And I'm like, this is not what I signed on for. But
Right. I
right,
remember that moment.
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember
And
that
it's
moment
like
like,
th- that day, which was when my father was already in the hospital from the
mm-hmm.
stroke and my mom was getting admitted, I saw my mother's breast, vagina, and my father's penis all on the
Yeah.
same day.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen that since I was a kid.
Right.
my mother's vagina I hadn't seen since I came out of it, and that
Same,
was
yeah,
fine with me, you know.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I felt like Oedipus. I wanted to poke my eyes out. I was like,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
too
yeah.
much. But, you
Yeah,
know,
I get it.
and you know, basically we can laugh about it, but at the
Mm,
time it was horrifying.
mm.
But there were lots of little things like that, and
Did you
uh,
find that you were like in those moments, for instance, confronted with my mom's vagina? I was fully having an out of body experience. Like this kind of narrator was observing and commenting and making jokes while like the me was just like, what's happening?
right. You know, it's funny. I think I tolerated seeing her breasts better than the vagina. I think the
Oh,
vagina,
totally,
I turned right around. I mean, I was just like,
totally.
I don't want to see this. I don't think I had um, that ability to leave myself and let somebody else, like the other parts of me, take over.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I mean,
but
I have a vagina. I don't know why it was so shocking, but it was, it was my mother's. So
right, right. You know, hey, listen, I, it was, it, yeah. I mean, my family was pretty modest.
uh-huh.
Not like my parents walked around naked in front of us, or
Right, right.
I mean, my father would sit around in his boxer shorts, and they
The
notoriously like didn't hold things inside. But
right,
you know,
right.
I didn't really want to like he was not the object of my lust. It was a developing gay boy.
Yeah,
It just wasn't. You know, it
right,
was
right.
other people I saw on TV and stuff like
Uh-huh.
that. But
That's definitely that
uh,
generation. I mean, I define that generation by the glimpse of the ball sack hanging through the boxers.
uh, there's a book in that, right? You
Yeah, I'm
know,
sure.
so. Um, But and as a the interesting thing was as a clinical psychologist, I'm a healthcare worker and I've worked in a number of hospitals and things.
Mhm.
And my first job out of college, I got really spoiled. I worked at a psych hospital for the really, really wealthy. You know, a place where people paid out of pocket and they could put their, you know, crazy kids there and leave them there until they were geriatric.
Oh wow.
That kind of like old fashioned psych hospital stuff. But the
Uh-huh.
level of care was intense, you know,
Yeah.
and you just don't see that anymore. And but I felt like I was in a position that I could demand that they get good care. And if they
Hmm.
weren't getting good care, I would let people know and I would get upset. Um, and sometimes it would get the better of me. Like the night I almost ended up in handcuffs because I was screaming at the nurses so much because
Really?
they were ignoring my mother who like was having a response to a medication and had the runs, was filling up every bedpan I could find in the,
Oh,
you know,
bless.
and they're like, well, we're going to report. We'll take care of your mom as soon as we get out. I'm like, she could be dead by then. You know, so
Hmm.
finally I just yelled out, who do I have to fuck to get a bedpan around here?
Yeah.
Next thing I know, there's a police officer at the door and they pulled me out of the room and put me in handcuffs. It was like,
What?
yeah, oh yeah. And this
Uh-uh.
was, now this was,
Where were you? What
this is
hospital?
in New Jersey. Well,
Jesus.
she was in a hospital in Newark, and because of you know Newark is a rough place, they have
Yeah.
actual cops as their security,
Okay.
so they have authority to do this kind of stuff.
Uh-uh.
But so this was 13 years ago. I walk into hospitals today and I see signs like, you know, our staff are working hard. If you harass them, we will have you arrested.
Mm.
So like this was long before any of that kind of stuff. Today, I'm
Hmm.
sure I would have ended up in jail. That day, the doctor kind of walked in at the time and said,
Hmm.
you know, realized what was going on and how nobody was helping me.
Yeah.
And so they basically said, you really don't want us to go to your supervisors down there at the station and say, you know,
Yeah.
like you couldn't even get this man bedpan while his mother was dying,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So they let me out, they let me go. But
Christ.
um, yeah, you know, it's like it's you're under stress and sometimes you don't
Hmm.
even recognize it and stuff.
Hmm.
But you know, but the handcuffs, you know, I guess they always kind of played into this like, whoa, that must have been really sexy fantasy of getting locked up. But in reality, I was a little bit anxious when it was happening. But in
Right.
retrospect, I laugh a lot about it.
That's a lot, Mike. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah,
To be under that kind of anxiety and pressure to have, exploded like that and then to be in handcuffs, like, yeah, you're lucky that you're just lucky.
yeah,
You could
yeah,
have gone so much further, It's good that you probably settled
uh,
down.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so you know, and then that went on for like 2.5 years.
Hmm.
My mother-in-law passed. Um, yeah, 2 years into it, and
Yeah.
then 6 months later, my mom went, and
So
both
it's a
my mother-in-law.
rolling show
But
of
it was this rolling thing of caregiving and loss.
wow.
You talk about a generation and what marks them. My mother-in-law was of a generation, and um, sort of a good prim Irish Catholic woman
Hmm.
who, you know, a doctor hadn't seen her down there
Hmm.
since my husband was born.
Right.
Basically, right? She never had a gynecological exam, anything like that.
Oh, wow.
And she calls him up one day and says, I'm kind of bleeding. And he's like, Mom, you got to get to the doctor.
Hmm.
That can't be good. And she was, can I just go see my general doctor? And he's just like, no, Mom, you got to see a gynecologist.
Hmm.
And sure enough, she had ovarian cancer.
Oh,
She had a hysterectomy and all kind of
yeah.
cared for her. And she was a very active woman, and chemo kind of took a lot of stuff away from her. Like
Yeah.
she couldn't dance anymore and
Yeah.
things like that. And it was very hard. As soon as she was done with her chemo, her cancer treatment for that, her doctor said, "So, Joan, when was the last time you had a mammogram?" And she sheepishly looked at the doctor and went, "I've never had one." Right? She was
Uh-huh.
in her late 70s at this point. So, sure enough, the mammogram, she's got a stage 1 breast cancer. So
Oh
then
my
she had to go through a
God.
mastectomy.
Oh my
And
God.
luckily, all she needed was the surgery. She didn't need chemo at that point and stuff like
Oh, that's
that.
good.
But we were commuting. She lived on Long Island, and if
Yeah.
you know anything about this part of the country, it's a you always face traffic when you're trying to get to this little fish that sits off of New York,
Hmm.
and it would be a 2-3 hour ride sometime. And like if we could just fly there like a bird, we'd be there in 40 minutes.
Hmm.
And she finally said, you guys have been so good, and you shouldn't have to keep coming out here and stuff. And she goes, I want to move out there, and let's see if I can get an apartment where Mike's mom is, and then it'll be easier for you.
Hmm.
Um, so we set that all up, and it took a while to happen. But she was leaving. She was getting ready to leave, and she went for her last doctor's appointment, and her blood work was all off.
Mm.
And it turned out that she had acute leukemia. We
Jesus
moved her. We moved her
Christ.
out, but then she was gone within 6 weeks of when we moved her out. Um,
Wow.
and that was from the chemo. The chemo
Oh
caused her
God,
leukemia.
really?
Yeah.
What a
So it raised for
nightmare.
me this whole specter of, if what would I do if I ever was faced with that? I
Hmm.
think chemo, if a doctor couldn't guarantee me like a good percent that this was
Hmm.
going to really help, I don't know
Hmm.
that I would try that kind of stuff. So
When
um
you had your so when you got your diagnosis, or do you want to keep going?
no, that's
Um,
fine. So it was very shortly after my mom. So my mom passed 6 months later, and then that was like in March,
mm,
and the following New Year's Eve, I was in the gym, because I was trying to lose some weight at the time,
hmm.
and I had this pain in my back, and I
Hmm.
was like, And by the time I got home, it was really big, and I'm like, all right, this is like when Tom had that kidney stone. I must have a kidney stone.
Yeah,
So go to the emergency room, sit in the emergency room for hours and hours and hours, and they
as you
said, well,
do.
it's not really a kidney stone. But the urologist said, but you have like some debris in there and stuff. So when you get a chance, make an appointment to come see me.
Hmm.
Um, and like I wasn't anxious to go and see
Yeah, no.
but so I go in, and now at this point I'm 48 years old.
Okay.
And he's
Young.
yeah, I was very young, and my PSA was way below where they get where PSA is a prostate specific antigen
Right. Thank you.
that tells you if it's high, they suspect you have cancer. Mine was very low,
Uh-huh.
but he did a digital,
Yeah.
and he goes, I feel something in there.
Crap.
Um, so he goes, make an appointment and come in for a biopsy. And that in itself was a strange experience because they use a punch needle, and they do it by sonogram, and like they're
Hmm.
basically up your asshole, like taking out pieces from inside your body. And
My
it's very
father
strange.
had that experience, and he said it was like being stung by bees.
I, I didn't necessarily. I would. I wouldn't say that that was how I experienced it.
Yeah.
It it was actually more of an audio thing for me because like
Interesting.
I could feel it, but they numb out your prostate, so it doesn't necessarily hurt.
Mm,
You know something's happening, but
mm,
they'd be like a click every time they took it, right?
okay.
Um, so they said, the test should be back in 2 weeks,
Hmm.
and I was like, okay,
Two
well,
weeks.
right at what and we well because they and oh the other thing was is while they were in there like this looks really clean. I'd be really surprised if you had cancer.
Uh-huh.
Right. So I was like, that put me at ease and stuff
So
like
you're
that.
doing your due diligence. All these people are
Right.
saying, maybe, yeah,
Yeah, like we're not that worried.
yeah, yeah.
A week later, they call and they said, "Oh, your biopsy's in. Would you like to come in earlier?" And part of me said, "Oh my God, it's bad. If they're calling me
Hmm.
to come in early, it must be bad." So
Hmm.
of course, my response was, "No, no, no. I'll keep my appointment a week from now. Um, I'm not in a rush to find out I have cancer."
Mike.
And so in like a week later and they put me like right in a room. I didn't even have to wait in the waiting room, which
Mm,
tells you something right there.
hmm.
But then I'm waiting all by myself in an examination room. Quite frankly,
Hmm.
I might have preferred to sit out with the magazines and been distracted. And the doctor comes in and he's like, well, there's a tumor there. I'm like, okay. And
Hmm.
then his phone rings and he looks at it and he goes, oh, excuse me, I have to take this. And he walks out of the room. This
Jeez.
was how I received my diagnosis.
Oh
Right.
man.
And then he comes back in. And in some ways, I was thinking, well, this gives me a little bit of time to respond and stuff. And
Mm.
he comes in and he goes, so, and I said, well, you don't seem really surprised. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you told me you'd be surprised that there was cancer there, but you don't look surprised. Like, kind of turn it back on him.
Hmm.
Um, and he's talking and talking. And I was like, look, I'm going to tape record this because I really, I'm kind of
Yeah.
overwhelmed and everything. And he was not happy about that.
Oh, really?
Um, but
It's hard to
he's
take
like,
it
well,
all in when you're in
right,
shock.
right. And he goes, well, we'll talk about this a dozen times before we take it out.
Hmm.
Right. Like he's already decided the treatment.
Yeah.
And I said, take it out. He goes, oh, yeah, at your age, surgery is the best option. Right. Well, my age, I'm 49 and I'm still using my prostate. Thank you very much.
Right, right.
Um, and he's like, well, you could do like radioactive seeding.
That's what my
You could
dad
do,
did.
yeah, you could do watch and wait, which is sort of like every 6 months you have to go through that biopsy experience.
Wee.
And that I was like, no, that I'm not doing. I'm not going through that like twice a year. And so, and I really was not feeling good. And I said to myself, doc, is there any way that they could preserve my prostate or be able to preserve my sexual functioning, et cetera? He goes, I'm still a young man. And, as a
Hmm.
gay man, a prostate probably has a different meaning than it
Yeah,
does to straight men, right?
it's kind of a big deal.
Right. That's where we get our pleasure, really. And
Right.
he starts talking to me about Rudy Giuliani. Right. Now, this was back when Rudy Giuliani was mayor and he had
He's really
left
trying to kill your sex drive.
right, right. He left his wife for his mistress. And right after he got diagnosed with prostate cancer, and it was very public on the front page of the New York Daily News type of
Hmm.
thing. And
Hmm.
he had chosen radioactive seeding because he still wanted to have a sex life.
Yeah,
But they don't guarantee anything with the seeding either. I mean, it can
yeah.
still affect the nerves and everything. So this doctor said, well, the one thing you have going for you is that it's going to be slow moving. You have time. Don't worry about it.
Hmm.
So I took that at his word and I waited a couple of months and then started
Hmm.
looking for a doctor. And I went to see a radiological oncologist. I went to see a surgeon, and lo and behold, the surgeon said your best bet is to have it removed. The radiologist was like, "Oh, your best bet is radioactive seeding and stuff like that." So
Hmm.
I'm like, and I tried to see it. Is there anybody out there that could give me input that wasn't going to be pushing it one way or the other, that didn't have an investment in it? That was
Hmm.
very hard to find.
I'm sure.
Um, and I had a friend, another psychologist, who was running support groups for gay men with prostate
Uh-huh.
cancer. I went to see him, and he was very good at helping me to calm down and all this kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
um,
Because you're up
he,
against a lot of opinionated.
Right.
medical
Well, yeah,
people.
everybody's got their idea about what
And
should
they're
happen.
very determined to, it's almost like they don't care about you in as much as they want to get their opinion across. They
Mhm.
want to be right.
Mhm.
And that's really
Right.
maddening.
Doctors are doctors are given the opportunity to be trained to listen.
Yeah.
And I know this because I worked in a medical school for a while and I taught medical students how to listen. And I
Mm.
know most of them didn't listen when I was trying to teach them how to listen. Um,
Jeez.
and basically, I I felt like I don't know. And meanwhile, my husband, who tends to be more anxious than I do,
Hmm.
or at least is much more out there with his anxiety, he was getting very anxious that I was waiting so long.
Mm.
And he was kind of pushing me and stuff. So finally, we'd heard about this one surgeon in New York who had really, really good record.
Hmm.
Supposedly 99.9% of his people maintain their nerves. They don't suffer incontinence.
Mm.
And even more important, his technique prevents shrinkage. Right. When
Oh,
they take your
fantastic.
prostate, they take a piece of your urethra with it
Hmm.
and have to pull it back to your bladder.
Hmm.
And they don't tell most men this, who then come out and find out that they're an inch and a half to 2 inches shorter than they were before they went in.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, well, that would be helpful because God wasn't very kind to me in that department anyway.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
and he was
Me
he was
neither.
Semitic. He was from some like Middle Eastern country. I'm not sure which one,
Hmm.
and it had a very abrupt manner and stuff. So I wasn't all that comfortable with him, but I decided I would go with him. And he worked robotically. And of course, I grew up on Lost in Space, so I just kept picturing this thing, Danger Will Robinson, coming in to operate on me.
Hmm.
Um, and
Can
lo and
you explain a
behold,
little bit more about the
so yeah,
robotic?
so the I don't even I never saw the robot because I was out by the time it was wheeled in.
I never saw the robot.
Right, it saw more of me than I care to think about,
Mm.
but um, they they do it arthroscopically. The robot makes little incisions, and
Hmm.
the way this doctor operated is he drops. I'm trying to remember how he basically drops the bladder to meet the urethra rather than pulling the urethra to meet the bladder.
Okay.
And he designed this technique, and this was what was so radical about it. But I ended up having both incontinence and sexual dysfunction afterwards,
Hmm.
and had to go through a lot of rehab. I did what do they call it? Pelvic floor
Hmm.
biofeedback.
Oh, wow.
After about a year and a half, I could finally go out without having to worry about whether I was going to come home with wet payouts and things like that. And
Yeah.
um, but the the nerve damage that was done it hasn't prevented a sex life, but it's interrupted. It's made it much more
Hmm.
complicated. And I think in retrospect, and as I'm writing, what I'm starting to realize is, how that impacts thinking about being a man, right?
Let's
And
stop
what kind of man
there
I am. Yeah.
and let's take a pause, and let's
Okay.
go to the next meeting site.
Okay.
This-
Wow. Time's flying fast.
yeah,
So, all
good
right.
stuff. Thank
All
you.
right. See you on the other side.
All right, great.
Bye. Where we leave off?
You were
Excuse me.
talking about being a man, about this
Right.
impact of,
So, it's sort of I mean, luckily I was married, and well, we weren't married at the time because gay marriage wasn't legal yet, but long-term relationship.
hmm.
And I wasn't like, my whole life wasn't about going out and tricking and things like
Right.
that. But if the opportunity presented, we'd always sort of said, whatever, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
Um, and the idea that you would have to explain that at the start of it,
Yeah.
and one of the things when you lose your prostate, they take the calpus gland, which produces the semen, so you can't ejaculate anymore. You
Uh-huh.
have very intense orgasms.
But dry.
You experience, yeah, the drive, but you experience them in your whole body, which, from what I understand, is much more how a woman would experience an orgasm
Yes.
than how a man experiences an orgasm.
Interesting.
Um, and but sometimes because of the connection to the bladder and the prostate would usually close at an
Mm-hmm.
orgasm, and you might like have a little stream of
Little.
urine come out or
Uh-huh.
something like
Yeah.
that, and not everybody's interested in that. So,
I bet
um,
some people are really interested in that.
well, that's true. That's true, and it's interesting because in my support group afterwards, there was a guy who used to talk about how he and his partner discovered their love of water sports
Oh yeah.
because of this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's changed my relationship to sex, and it's changed my
Mm-hmm.
relationship to my genitals. I'm sort of aware that the body isn't always rooting for you. Sometimes it's rooting for someone else. I mean,
Right.
um,
I just want
you
to
know,
interject, Mike, that I had a hysterectomy, a sort
uh,
of gender surgery or whatever, and went through a very similar experience of incontinence and
uh,
my sexual pleasure and having to sort of relearn, and reconnect neurologically, and
right. Oh,
it's
I can totally comprehend.
yeah.
And was there any support for you in that process?
No, no, I didn't go to any sort of group. And it's interesting because I wonder if there is a group. It seems so much more obvious to me that there would be a men's group because
Uh,
men are so naturally accepting of pleasure, and the importance of pleasure is in sexual pleasure is in takes in their lives. Whereas I think women are just
right.
acculturated to not, perhaps.
Maybe, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know,
It,
speculating.
it was interesting when I was in the pelvic floor rehab. For anybody who doesn't know how it works, is they give you this little probe, which is about
Hmm.
a pencil with little metal thing about that big. You have to put it up your rectum,
Hmm.
and basically it then gets hooked by wires to a computer, and you see how much control you're gaining over
Oh,
your muscles
cool.
on the pelvic floor,
That's
right?
kind of cool.
So, so it is when you think about it, right? And so the therapist was a woman,
Hmm.
and she would give me the probe and tell me to insert it, and she'd leave the room, and then she'd come back, and she came in
Hmm.
one time, and I was sitting down. She goes, "You're sitting down with that?" And I said, "I don't even feel it." I said, you know I'm a gay man. I've had much bigger things there,
Right.
and she blushed like crazy. I said, "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, but the reality is, it doesn't bother me at all, right?"
Right,
So,
right.
but then you have to do things like jumping jacks and squats and stuff with this
That
thing
just
because
sounds like a lot of pee happening
it's about learning
to me.
to. Luckily, I don't think I ever peed during the process.
Oh, really?
Um, but I it did help me gain control.
Hmm.
Not total, but that came with time.
Hmm.
Maybe that'll make this. Maybe that will make the signal a little stronger.
I hope so.
Um,
So
yeah.
you met with this doctor, and tell me the story again, please.
All right. So he's blaming me for the fact that I'm continuing to have incontinence. And he's like, "You're just not trying hard enough." And I said, "No, you're not trying hard enough to take care of
Wow.
me." I said,
Wow.
"Because if you were really trying to take care of me, you wouldn't be blaming me for these side effects. Right? You'd have a
Yeah.
little empathy here." And I never went back to him.
Good.
I definitely went to my GP and I said, if you can follow it, I'll follow it with you. If not, we'll try to find another urologist. Um,
Hmm.
I'm, I still like, I'm like, I don't know that there is a good urologist within a 50-mile radius of where I live at this
Interesting.
point. I don't trust them anymore.
Uh-huh.
I really shook that up.
Sounds like
So,
they lack, or yours certainly lack compassion, and
right.
yeah.
It's almost like they don't get that they are working around our most private parts, right?
Hmm.
Like we're just raised with so much. Um, I don't know. I don't know. We all have shame, but there's so many
Yeah.
clues around it. Whatever. We don't talk about that part
Well,
of
and
it.
there's stakes involved. There are
Right.
real
Right.
stakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, it just amazed me, their inability to talk about it,
Wow.
and the other part of it, and you'd think, well, maybe as nurses would be better at it, right?
Hmm.
But I I had gotten a lap band
Hmm.
about, must have been about 9 months before my diagnosis.
Okay.
And at that point, I had lost about 70 pounds.
Wow.
And the nurse was like, "Well, you have to lose weight. That's
Uh-huh.
one of the risk factors here." And I said, "Well, I just lost 70 pounds." She goes, "Well, obviously it's not enough."
Oh my God. What is wrong with people?
It was like,
So
exactly. I'm like,
shaming.
you fail. You just failed. Like
Yeah.
totally. It was awful.
Wow. No, like,
So,
congratulations. Yeah.
right, right. So flash forward to,
Mm.
this past spring. I guess, wow, it's February, so it's going on 10 months ago now.
Hmm.
Um, no, 9 months ago. Um, I was in New York City. My husband was scheduled for a knee replacement,
Hmm.
and the hospital has a hotel attached to it. And since we didn't know what time he'd need to be in, we decided we'd stay in the city at night. And got in. I felt some discomfort in my chest, and I thought I was having a little panic attack or something. I took some Klonopin. It was
Hmm.
fine. Went out, had dinner, walked 3 or 4 miles around the city,
Hmm.
come back. It was the night of the Grammys last year,
Yeah.
and we were watching the Grammys, and I all of a sudden this tight stricture across my chest, and I'm like, and nothing's helping. I tried another Klonopin, that didn't work.
Uh-huh.
He was like, "We'll call in an ambulance,"
Yeah.
and the ambulance people come, and of course, by the time the ambulance drivers get there, I'm feeling fine. Like it's
Okay.
stopped, right? And I'm like, and so they do an EKG. My EKG is normal,
Hmm.
and they're like, "Can so it's normal. If you don't want to go to the hospital, you don't have to."
Right.
And I was like, and my husband's like, "You're going. We're not taking any
Good
chances
for
here."
him.
So they do this measure. There's an enzyme called troponin, which, if your heart muscle is breaking down, gets
That's
elevated,
released.
which says that's how they tell you if you're having a heart attack.
Uh,
And when I went in, it was at 70, which was kind of normal. And
mhm.
within an hour and a half, it was at 280. And they're
Holy
like, "You're having a heart attack. You're being admitted." And I was like, "Okay,
wow.
fine." I was like, whatever. And,
And how are you feeling in that moment?
um, I was a little bit, I guess I was kind of scared. I mean, what I
Yeah.
really reflected on was, um, my mom, who died from heart disease. She had
Hmm.
her first heart attack and bypass surgery at 59.
Oh, wow,
Um,
young.
my, my older brother died in his sleep. They assumed it was from a heart attack at 60.
So this is
Well,
genetic.
at 59, he was like 3 months before his 60th birthday.
Yeah.
So I'm now 6 months past my 60th birthday.
Yeah.
And when I hit 60, I'm like, all right, I'm home free. I made it. I didn't have a heart attack before I turned 60.
Damn
And
it.
now 6 months later, I'm like, shit,
Damn it. Spoke too
Um,
soon. Oops.
and part of the issue is, and this is part, like my exposure to like the downside of the healthcare system
Hmm.
times 10. I'm out of network. My insurance doesn't have any coverage outside of the state of New Jersey.
Oh no.
So I don't know if any of this is getting covered.
Oh God.
It ended up being covered at like 50%, but like I'll be
Better than
paying for my
nothing,
heart
but
attack for a long time.
right.
And I was a little bit reluctant to let them do any procedures
Hmm.
until I knew what kind of coverage I was going to have, right?
Oh
And they're like
God,
seeing me
Mike.
as being resistant and everything like that. So finally, I agreed to have the angioplasty, and they think I'm
Hmm.
going to need a stent. Um, was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, and if I'm good about taking care of my heart now, it's because I don't ever want to go through that again. Laying on a table, stark naked.
Mm-hmm.
They put a plastic sheet over you for sterile reasons and stuff like that before they go in through your veins and everything like that. And they give you
Hmm.
like a little piece of cloth to put over your genitals,
Hmm.
right? I never felt more exposed in my life. And so all these
Hmm.
people, you have no idea who they are. They're talking about you.
Yeah.
I'm like, put me out. I don't want to be awake for this. I mean, I'm
Right.
sure this happens when I'm in surgery. I'm sure this happens lots of other times.
Right.
I just, I'm not comfortable with this.
Yeah.
Um, so I needed a stent. Luckily, there was very little damage. I got sent home the next day.
Hmm.
Um, but I really started to think about like, all right, what led to this? I've always been conscientious about my cholesterol. I've,
Hmm.
you know, at this point, I've lost 110 pounds
Hmm.
from my gastric surgery.
Congratulations.
And oh, thanks. I mean, since the heart attack, I've lost even more.
Wow.
I weigh less now than I did in high school, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and we laugh. Us like, if I was Christian, I could say, I almost fit my christening dress, that kind of thing. But I, it just really felt like what caused this. And when they started to explain it to me, I learned a hell of a lot. They measure all these cholesterols when they do your blood work, right? So
Yeah.
there's one that they don't measure.
Mm.
And the reason they don't measure it is because there's nothing they can do about
Ah,
it, right?
wow.
So they measure it at this point, and of course, mine is sky high, and
Yeah.
it's a genetic thing.
Yeah.
And the only thing they can do is keep all your other cholesterols low,
Yeah.
and that will help. So I'm now on the anti-cholesterol meds. I'm on
Right.
blood pressure
Right.
meds, even though my blood pressure was always very low. Um,
You've got
they say
this.
that blood pressure meds reshape your heart. Sound like bullshit to me, but I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to be a good boy here. Um, Luckily, I get to come off of those in another month or two. But
Fantastic.
the cholesterol meds I'll probably be on for life.
Sure.
And it's sort of like every twinge, everything you feel in your body, you're like, what is this now?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
And
sure.
right,
So you're in a
and
state of sort of what is it called? High, not
high
anxiety,
alert,
alert.
basically. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like
You
PTSD.
right, you become very aware of your body, and I also became petrified to eat. I'm like,
Oh,
because I met with two different dietitians,
yeah.
and they would give you like try to eat more of this and less of this. And what I really wanted was, don't eat this anymore.
Right.
Don't eat this anymore. Don't eat
Right.
this
Some
anymore. Right?
finite.
So I start reading labels, and it's sort of
Yeah.
like, is that too high in saturated fat? Is that the good fat? Is that the bad fat?
Yeah.
And trying to keep all that straight in my mind. And I think for the first 4 or 5 months after the
Hmm.
heart attack, I was on a very limited diet. I mean, I was not
Hmm.
eating anything, and I lost another 20 pounds.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
it was a
yeah,
lot.
so I mean, you're very lucky to be able to have all this medical intervention, however, awful some of it was.
Right, right.
But now I'm sort of wondering, we're sort of coming to the big question, which is, so what is motivating you now, or what keeps you going? I mean, you don't sound like someone who suffers from a depression, but maybe
Right.
some anxiety or something.
I, I, I think I think I've always struggled with depression, actually.
Have you?
Um, I'm not at that point right at the moment. I think what keeps me going is that um, I have a lot of things left that I want to do.
Mm.
I have a bucket list.
Hmm.
I
Can you share any?
Yeah, sure. In planning for retirement, my husband and I, we both love to travel.
Uh-huh.
Our hope is really to live in a different country for a month every year
Oh,
during our
nice.
retirement. Now,
Yeah.
I don't, with economic conditions, things like that, I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's still on there. And even if
Uh-huh.
it's not, we're going to travel. We're going to do things.
Right. It's
Um,
aspirational.
right. I get a lot of pleasure out of watching my nieces and nephews become adult, and
Uh-huh.
now that I'm a great uncle, starting to watch the little ones again. Um, and I have two dogs that are my life, and I
Hmm.
spend a lot of time with them. Um, and I discovered writing later on in life.
Hmm.
There was a meme on the internet the other day. It's like, which was encouraging older people to try things, and like,
Hmm.
Vlad the Impaler didn't start impaling people until he was in his 30s. Um, and I was like, that is my motto. I was like, how
Yes.
great can you be, right? But it's interesting because the thing that attracted me when I saw on Facebook that you were looking for people
Uh,
for your show, um, was basically, the question why live, and
yeah.
things like that. And one of the things that has always gotten to me through both my health crises, my parents' health crises, is the people that say to you, well, it's better than the alternative, right? Meaning it's better than being dead.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I always look at them and I said, oh, have you been dead? Do you know that for sure?
Right. Being
Because
dead could be
we don't know,
amazing.
right?
It
Like
could be
death could be
amazing.
the greatest thing in the world. And I don't believe in an afterlife. I take a lot
Hmm.
of comfort in not believing in an afterlife.
Hmm.
Woody Allen and Hannah and Her Sisters has that moment when he's contemplating becoming a Hare Krishna, and he starts thinking about reincarnation, and he's like, does this mean I have to sit through the ice capades again? I don't want to sit through the ice capades again,
Sure.
right? Like, I love the things I do. I'm
Yeah.
glad to do them. But when I'm done, I don't care. It's
Hmm.
like I'm done. I don't need
Hmm.
to worry about that.
Hmm.
So I take a lot of comfort in that. And I think it's just going to be like maybe not even like a sleep. Like you're just not even going to be feeling or doing anything.
Hmm.
And that feels okay to me, but as
Yeah.
long as I fill this life, um, and my attitude has always been, as long as I keep going, even if
Hmm.
I don't do everything on my bucket list, I'm not going to have regrets. I'm not going to look
Yeah.
back and say, "Oh, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that." So I discovered writing. My my first book came out a week before my 60th birthday.
Hmm.
It was how I celebrated. Um, and it said to me, you can do this, you can keep doing this. And so I started working. Actually, I have two works going on right now. The
Oh,
one about
great. Oh, that's
my
so
my
great.
healthcare experiences, and then I'm writing a novel about the aftermath of the school shooting.
Oh,
um,
wow. Wow.
which is a bit in some ways more dramatic than my writing about my health crises in some ways,
Yeah.
but because there's no humor in that book, or
Right.
none. It's not, that's not its purpose anyway. um but
Yeah. I didn't become a
so
writer till late too.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So um I that's what keeps me going,
You have stuff to do.
is having
And
those things.
how does your partnership sort of aid in that, or is that a piece of the equation?
Depends on the day of the week. Some days it's like, oh god, death means the end of this. Yeah, no.
Right.
But for the most part, we're there for each other. We take care of each other.
Yeah.
We're pretty good at taking care of each other.
That's great.
And he's a psychologist also, so we're both
Oh,
caregivers, right?
okay.
And sometimes at the end of the day, we don't want to listen to each other because we've been listening to people all day.
Uh-huh.
Um, since the pandemic, I spend my life on Zoom,
Mm.
talking to people all day. So
Hmm.
this was, this was special because I usually won't get on Zoom on the weekends for anything, but I wanted to do
I
this for
really
you.
appreciate it, Mike. I
Oh, it's
really
not an
do.
issue. I'm more than happy.
At least now
Um,
you get to speak.
right, right. Yeah, when I was doing stand up, I used to have a thing about being a psychologist and not loving being a psychologist. And I said, as a psychologist, I have to sit and listen to people all day long. As a comedian, you have to listen to me. And either way, I don't get paid very much. So,
But
but yeah, but it was, I'm not done. I'm not
yeah,
done living,
yeah.
and whatever comes afterwards, I guess that's the surprise I'll find out when I get there. But you know,
Well, thanks for joining me this morning.
you're welcome. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this. It was a great conversation. It was
Yeah.
great to finally talk face to face, even if it's over
Mm.
line. We've had a number of chats online and
Hmm.
stuff, and but and one of these days I'll get down and visit my niece and grandnieces, and we'll have to do coffee.